Falsely accused cop pleads to reunite with his K-9 partner. What unfolded will leave you speechless. David sat in his small, cold prison cell, the noise of metal doors slamming echoing down the long hallway. The walls were bare, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete. He stared at the small window high up on the wall, barely able to see the sky. It was a grim reality. His life had taken a sharp turn from the day he was wrongfully accused of a crime he didn't commit. Once a proud police officer, now he was just another man in an orange jumpsuit, surrounded by criminals he had spent his life protecting others from. The weight of the false accusation crushed him. It wasn't just his career that was taken from him. It was his dignity, his trust in the system, and most of all, the loss of his loyal K-9 partner, Max. Every night, as David lay on the hard prison cot, he thought about his old life. He thought about Max, the dog who had stood by his side through thick and thin, the dog he had sworn to protect. Max had been his friend, his partner, and now, after everything that had happened, David feared he would never see him again. David clenched his fists in frustration, tears welling up in his eyes. He had lost everything, and now he was alone. The life he had once known, working as a dedicated officer, making a difference, felt like a distant memory, far out of reach. The days in prison blended together, each one feeling more hopeless than the last. David couldn't help but replay the events that had led to his wrongful conviction, over and over in his mind. The betrayal by Captain Hughes, the officer he had trusted most, still felt like a fresh wound. He had been framed for a crime he didn't commit, his reputation shattered in an instant. David's heart ached with the sense of betrayal. He had always believed in justice. He had dedicated his life to serving the community, but now he was the one on the other side of the law. His cell felt like a constant reminder of the life he had lost. Every time the guards walked by, he could hear the whispers about his case, about how a man he had once respected had set him up. It was almost too much to bear. But what hurt the most wasn't the betrayal by his fellow officers or the years he had lost. It was the thought of Max. He remembered how Max had looked at him with those trusting eyes before he was taken away. It was as if Max knew something David didn't. Maybe Max knew he was innocent. Maybe Max was still out there, waiting for him, but David had no way of knowing. David's mind was a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and confusion. He couldn't understand why this had happened to him. He wanted to fight back, to prove his innocence, but it felt like an impossible battle. He had no allies, no voice, and no way of reaching out to those who might believe in him. All he had was the memory of the man he once was, and the dog who had always been by his side. Suddenly, David's thoughts shifted, and he was back in the days before everything changed. In his mind's eye, he could see the first time he met Max. The dog was just a pup, barely a year old, with a curious look in his eyes. David had been skeptical at first. He had heard about the new K-9 recruit, but nothing could have prepared him for the bond they would form. It wasn't long before David and Max became inseparable. The two of them worked together on patrols, investigating crimes, and protecting the community. Max's nose was sharp, and his instincts were flawless. Whether they were chasing down suspects or searching for drugs and weapons, Max was always there, ready to leap into action. And David trusted him with his life. There were moments in those early days when David would look at Max and know, without a doubt, that the dog understood him. Max wasn't just a partner, he was family. David remembered the time they had spent hours searching a building, hunting down dangerous criminals. When the job was done, David would kneel down and ruffle Max's fur, and the dog would wag his tail in a way that made David smile every time. On weekends, after a long week of work, David and Max would take walks together. It was during these moments, away from the chaos of their jobs, that David realized how much Max meant to him. The dog wasn't just loyal. He was comforting, a constant presence that made David feel less alone in the world. Max had become more than just a partner. He had become a friend, someone David could count on no matter what. But now, all of that felt like a lifetime ago. The pain of being separated from Max was something David couldn't put into words. He missed his friend, missed the feeling of having someone who understood him completely. Every night in that cold cell, he would close his eyes and think back to those moments, wishing he could go back to that time when everything was right in his world. David knew that he couldn't give up, though. As long as there was even a sliver of hope, he would fight to clear his name. And if there was even a chance of being reunited with Max, David would do whatever it took. Days turned into weeks, and David's hope started to dwindle. The walls of his cell seemed to close in around him as he waited for something. Anything that might lead to his freedom. He knew deep down that he was innocent, but without proof, there was nothing he could do. Then, just when David was starting to lose faith, the turning point arrived. Max, still in the care of the K9 unit, had been used in routine investigations, despite David's absence. But during one of the searches, something unusual happened. Max's incredible sense of smell led him to a hidden file in a locked drawer, tucked away in the chief's office, an office David had once worked in. The file contained a document that could prove David's innocence. It was evidence that Captain Hughes, the officer who had framed him, had been involved in a much larger web of corruption. The news of Max's discovery quickly reached David, and for the first time in months, a spark of hope flickered in his chest. The file contained a series of transactions and messages implicating Hughes and several other high-ranking officers in criminal activities. It was the breakthrough David had been waiting for, the proof that he wasn't just wrongfully accused. He had been set up. This was the piece of the puzzle that could finally clear his name and expose the truth. David felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. Max hadn't forgotten him. Despite being separated for so long, the bond between them remained unbroken. Max had played a critical role in David's redemption. It wasn't just a moment of discovery. It was the first real glimmer of justice in a long time. With the new evidence in hand, David's fight for redemption was far from over. The conspiracy was much deeper than he had ever imagined, and the corrupt officials who framed him were part of a larger network that reached into the highest levels of local politics and law enforcement. To stand a chance at exposing the truth, David knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed allies, people who believed in justice as much as he did. Enter Emma, David's former partner. Emma had always been someone David trusted implicitly. They had shared many long nights on the job, fighting side by side for what was right. After David's wrongful conviction, Emma had been one of the few who never doubted his innocence. She had quietly gathered information, looking for cracks in the case, but she had been careful. Too many people in the department were involved in the conspiracy. Now, with the new evidence in hand, Emma was more determined than ever to help David clear his name. Together, they formed a small, secret team. Emma used her connections and inside knowledge to dig deeper, while David focused on understanding the full extent of the corruption. The deeper they went, the more they uncovered bribery, drug rings, and even the cover-up of several high-profile cases. The investigation revealed that Captain Hughes wasn't just a rogue officer. He was part of a massive criminal operation that had been operating under the radar for years. David and Emma quickly realized they were up against powerful people, and the stakes were higher than ever. If they didn't expose the conspiracy soon, the truth could be buried forever, and David's fight for redemption would be in vain. But no matter how dangerous the road ahead, David knew one thing for sure. He had to finish what he started, for himself and for the justice that had been stolen from him. As David and Emma worked tirelessly on the investigation, Max became an integral part of their team. Max's unparalleled skills were no longer just limited to sniffing out drugs or apprehending criminals. Now, he was helping David and Emma uncover evidence that no one else could find. Max's keen nose led them to hidden documents, files, and even underground safe houses where key evidence had been stored away. Max could sniff out anything, be it a hidden stash of cash or a hidden memory card containing vital recordings. His instincts were sharp, and his loyalty to David was unwavering. It was almost as if Max understood the gravity of the situation. One evening, Max led David and Emma to a seemingly insignificant warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was a place no one had thought to search. As they entered, Max immediately began sniffing around, his tail wagging in excitement. After a few minutes, he stopped near a stack of crates, sniffing at a particular box. David opened it, and inside, They found a cache of hidden files that were crucial to the investigation. Documents detailing illegal transactions between the police department and several criminal organizations. With Max's help, David and Emma pieced together the final pieces of the puzzle. Every time they thought they were at a dead end, Max was there, leading them to the next clue. It became clear that Max wasn't just a dog. He was a key player in their mission to expose the truth. The bond between David and Max had never been stronger. They had always trusted each other in the field, but now, as they fought together for justice, their bond was more powerful than ever. With Max's help, they would uncover the truth, and nothing would stop them from bringing the criminals to justice. David knew that with Max by his side, they could face whatever dangers lay ahead. Together, they would not only clear his name but also take down the corrupt system that had wronged them both. The investigation had been building for weeks, and David and Emma could feel the walls closing in on them. They were getting closer to exposing the corrupt network that had framed David and put countless lives at risk. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. Powerful people were beginning to take notice, and they wouldn't let their empire crumble without a fight. One night, as David, Emma, and Max were staying at a safe house, preparing to meet with a trusted journalist who could help blow the lid off the conspiracy, the worst happened. The attack came without warning. David was in the living room going over the evidence one last time, while Emma checked in with their contact. Max lay by the door, alert, as always. Suddenly, a loud bang shattered the silence. The front door was kicked in, and armed assailants stormed in, guns raised. It was clear they had come to silence them for good. The first shots rang out, narrowly missing David as he dove for cover. Emma grabbed Max's leash and yanked him to safety, but they were outnumbered. The attackers were trained, ruthless, and ready to kill. They didn't care about justice. They only wanted to keep their secrets hidden. Max barked ferociously, his protective instincts kicking in. He charged toward one of the attackers, knocking him off balance long enough for David to grab a weapon and fight back. The house became a chaotic battlefield as they scrambled to stay alive. Emma held her ground, trying to make sure the evidence was safe, but the tension was unbearable. Every second felt like a lifetime. In the heat of the battle, one of the attackers managed to get close to David, aiming a gun directly at him. But Max, without hesitation, leaped between them. The bullet grazed Max's side as he knocked the assailant to the ground. David's heart raced as he saw his loyal partner injured, but Max's bravery didn't waver. In that moment, David realized just how much this fight meant, not only for his redemption but for the justice that had been stolen from so many others. With Max's sacrifice, David and Emma managed to subdue the attackers and escape with their lives. But Max was hurt, and David knew they couldn't keep running forever. They had to finish what they started. The battle wasn't over yet. It had only just begun. The attack had been a brutal reminder of the dangers they faced, but it also pushed David and Emma to the tipping point. They couldn't afford to back down now. Max's bravery, even in the face of danger, fueled their determination to see this through. The conspiracy was much bigger than they ever imagined, but now they had the final pieces of the puzzle. After recovering from the attack, David and Emma pressed on. They managed to get the critical evidence to the journalist, despite the close call. It was a risky move, but it was the only way to make sure the truth came to light. The evidence was undeniable: secret bank transactions, photos of high-ranking officials meeting with criminals, and the incriminating documents that linked the conspiracy to powerful politicians and law enforcement officers. The journalist, a trusted ally, immediately began working on the exposé. But time was running out. David and Emma knew they had to act fast before the corrupt officials could cover their tracks or silence the journalist. They were playing a dangerous game, but they had no choice. The only way to defeat the conspiracy was to expose it to the world. The breakthrough came when the journalist released the story, and the investigation went public. News outlets exploded with reports of corruption within the police department, local government, and organized crime. The evidence was irrefutable. David's wrongful conviction was just the tip of the iceberg. The true scale of the corruption shocked the nation, and the public outrage was deafening. One by one, the corrupt officials were arrested. Captain Hughes, who had framed David, was among the first to fall. The mastermind behind the entire operation, a powerful local politician who had orchestrated the illegal activities, was also arrested, and his empire began to crumble. David's name was cleared, and the injustice he had suffered for so long was finally corrected. But the victory didn't feel like a simple win, it was a turning point. It was proof that no matter how deep the corruption, the truth would eventually surface. David had fought for justice, and with Max and Emma by his side, they had brought down a system that had been built on lies. As the dust settled and the corrupt officials were brought to justice, David stood tall. He looked at Max, who was still recovering from his injuries, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Without Max, none of this would have been possible. Max had not only been David's partner in law enforcement but also in the fight for redemption. Together, they had overcome impossible odds, and together, they had exposed the truth. The battle was over. Justice had prevailed, and David, Max, and Emma had earned their peace. As the truth about the conspiracy unfolded, the entire city was rocked to its core. The revelations of widespread corruption shook the very foundations of the justice system that had once been trusted to protect its citizens. The arrests of high-ranking officers, politicians, and criminals who had orchestrated the operation were swift and thorough. Each arrest was a small victory in the long battle for justice. Captain Hughes, the man who had framed David, was taken into custody first. His once proud career as a law enforcement officer had crumbled, and now he faced charges of conspiracy, corruption, and numerous other crimes. His arrest made headlines, as the public finally realized the extent of the betrayal they had been living under. But Captain Hughes was just one piece of the puzzle. As more evidence surfaced, the network of corruption began to unravel. The mastermind, the local politician who had manipulated the system for his own gain, was arrested in a dramatic scene. His influence had stretched far, but now it was clear that no one was beyond the reach of justice. With his arrest, the conspiracy that had ensnared so many innocent lives was exposed, and the corrupt empire crumbled. The public's response was one of mixed emotions: outrage, disbelief, and a newfound hope that the justice system could be trusted again. While many celebrated the arrests, there were also those who were left in shock, realizing how easily they had been deceived by those they once looked up to. The consequences were severe, and those involved faced lengthy prison sentences for their roles in the scheme. For David, the sense of justice was bittersweet. He had been proven innocent, but the cost of that victory had been high. Lives had been lost and reputations shattered. But with the arrests and the public outcry, the truth was finally set free, and David knew that the damage done was not in vain. The city had taken its first steps toward healing. The storm had passed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, David and Max could breathe easy. The fight for justice was over, and the city was starting to heal from the scars left by corruption. But David knew that the real journey had always been about more than just clearing his name. It was about restoring the honor and trust that had been shattered by betrayal. One evening, after the dust had settled, David found himself sitting in the quiet of his home, a cup of coffee in hand, staring out the window. Max, now fully recovered from the attack, lay at his feet, his steady breathing the only sound in the room. For a long time, David had been consumed by anger, frustration, and the desire for revenge. But now, as he looked at Max, all he could feel was gratitude. The journey had been long, and the road to redemption had been filled with pain and loss. But through it all, David had never been alone. Max had been his constant companion, his unwavering ally in the darkest moments. David's heart swelled with pride as he thought of the courage Max had shown, not just in the heat of battle, but in the quiet moments when they needed each other the most. The phone buzzed on the table, pulling David out of his thoughts. It was Emma checking in. After all they had been through, Emma had become more than just a partner. She had become a friend, someone who had risked everything to help him uncover the truth. Their conversation was brief but meaningful, filled with gratitude and a shared understanding that they had all done something remarkable. As David hung up the phone, he returned his gaze to Max. The battle had been won, But the war was never about just exposing corruption. It was about reclaiming what had been lost. Trust, loyalty, and the belief that good could still triumph in a world full of darkness. David placed his coffee cup down and stood up, walking over to Max and giving him a gentle pat on the head. "We did it, boy," he whispered. "We made sure the truth came out." Max's eyes flickered up to David's, his tail wagging faintly in response. In that moment, David realized that true peace didn't come from the end of a battle. It came from knowing you had done what was right, no matter the cost. It came from standing up for what you believed in, even when the world seemed against you. And, most importantly, it came from having a partner by your side who would never give up on you. Together, they had fought for justice, and together, they had won. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, David felt a sense of peace. The weight of the world had been lifted, and the quiet comfort of knowing the truth had prevailed was all that mattered now. David and Max, once broken by injustice, were now free. They had fought not just for themselves but for everyone who had ever been wronged. And in that silence, as the sun began to set, David knew that no matter what happened next, they had made a difference. In the end, the truth had won, and honor had been restored. As the story of David and Max drew to a close, it became clear that their journey was more than just a fight for one man's innocence. It was a powerful reminder of the enduring strength of loyalty, truth, and justice, values that, even in the face of corruption and betrayal, will always prevail. David and Max had both been tested to their limits. David's wrongful conviction had torn his life apart, while Max had been his steadfast companion through it all. Their bond had withstood not only the tests of time but also the pressures of a broken system, and in the end, it was that bond that made all the difference. Together, they had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened the very fabric of their society, and together, they had exposed it for the world to see. But the story didn't just end with the arrests of corrupt officials or the exposure of the conspiracy. The true victory lay in the message it carried, that even when the odds are stacked against you, there is always hope. When faced with injustice, the truth can still shine through, and when people stand together, change is possible. David's reflection on their journey wasn't just about his own redemption. It was about the future, about the world they had fought to make better. The consequences of their actions would ripple through the justice system, reminding those who sought power for their own gain that they would not be able to hide behind lies forever. The city would heal, but the scars of the past would never be forgotten. People would now know that justice, no matter how elusive, was worth fighting for. They would remember the courage it took to stand up against overwhelming odds and the sacrifices made along the way. David and Max's story would inspire others to never give up, to never stop fighting for what was right, even when it seemed like all hope was lost. David and Emma would continue to work together, ensuring that the lessons learned during their investigation would be passed on to future generations. And Max, the true hero of the story, would forever be remembered as the loyal companion who never wavered, whose unwavering dedication to his handler had helped expose the truth. The story of David and Max was one of resilience, of the power of a single truth to break through years of lies, and of the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. But above all, it was a story of hope. Hope that justice can prevail, hope that the truth will always find a way, and hope that no matter the darkness we face, there is always light at the end of the tunnel. In the end, David and Max had proven that, no matter the obstacles in their path, the fight for justice was always worth it. And for those who continue to fight, their story would remain a beacon of hope, a reminder that the pursuit of truth and justice can change the world, one step at a time.